Welcome to Women's Wars, a podcast series from Bern. I am Georgina Bame. For this series, I have interviewed 10 extraordinary women from countries that emerged from the former Yugoslavia. They are activists and journalists who were inspired by the wars of the 90s to take action to support the survivors and advocate for human rights. By telling their stories, these courageous women show how wars continue to have an impact on ordinary people decades after they were fought. In this episode of Women's Wars, Dubravka Stojanovic talks about protesting against the regime of Slobodan Milosevic in the 80s and 90s and coming full circle by joining students in the recent protest against the Serbian government. Dubravka Stojanovic graduated in history in the late 80s, just before the Yugoslav wars began. Some of her professors in the University of Belgrade were highly engaged in the anti-nationalist movement and the opposition to Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic. Soon after graduation, Stojanovic started working in a historical institute under the wing of Latinka Perovic, a well-known Yugoslav politician who was vocal in opposing the wars and rising Serbian nationalism.
Well, I started immediately. It was already in 89 because the opposition parties that were somehow already organized, they asked for elections and they asked for the new law that would allow multi-party system, which Milosevic didn't want. When the siege of Vukovar started in autumn 91, we organized the candles around the place where Milosevic, around his palace, every evening at 8 o'clock. And we guessed that maybe even 100,000 people were on the streets of Belgrade against the siege of Sarajevo. That was in April 92.
Stojanovic worked at the Institute for Recent History of Serbia until 1996, when she became an assistant professor, and to this day she is one of the biggest supporters of student land protests against the authorities.
We organized different protests, and Milosevic's regime was not that aggressive against those protests. He started to be aggressive later in the 90s. Especially in 96, 97, when the opposition parties, in fact, won the local elections. So that were the elections in November 96, and Milosevic refused to acknowledge the results. So the huge protests that lasted for 3 months every day, protests organized by students and professors on one hand, and then of citizens, together with political parties, were organized every day for 3 months.
You said that you were teaching in the university, you were an assistant professor. Did you becoming part of the student protest bring you closer to the students?
Yes, of course. As I said, I was just few years older than they were at that time. And I was completely new at the university, so we were very close immediately. And I gave them my office, so my office became the center of information. And now that generation that led those protests in 96, 97, they always say, your office, we adored it. Especially because the number of my office was 666, like a devil. So that was really funny that it's a center of devils. And I was extremely proud because at that time we had that fax machine and fax, yes, emails, of course, existed, but still all the paper went through fax machine. And I was extremely proud because all the congratulations and all the support for students came to my office. And for a long time, I had all that on my walls. For example, Monty Python, they draw something very funny and said, Monty Python is with you. And they sent it to that fax machine. Unfortunately, it's lost now somewhere. But well, that was really the center of information, and we slept there because we were guarding the faculty against the police, and it was very dramatic, almost like this year at the university again. So now I'm close to my retirement, and again I'm sleeping at the faculty. So I think it's quite a nice career.
Nice wrap up. But what about the relation with other faculty members? Were they also supportive at the time, or did you have issues with them?
Since I'm working at the Faculty of Philosophy, we were always in opposition. So there were very few professors that supported Milosevic regime. We can say that less than 5 professors out of 200.
Stojanovic claims that the protesters believed they would make a change, taken by surprise by the brutality of the Milosevic regime against the protesters in Serbia and in the wars across former Yugoslavia. In November last year, similarly to the late 90s, Stojanovic supported her students in the protest against the government. While the police brutality is similar, there is one very important distinction. This time, students might have a real chance.
Milosevic regime, in fact, didn't dare to be aggressive against students. It's actually worse nowadays because it's clear that students are the main force against the regime. So they are very much afraid of students, which was not the case of Milosevic regime, because at that time students, in fact, didn't want to come to power.
Stojanovic is a vocal critic of the way history is taught in Serbia and the dangers of historical revisionism. You are one of the few people in Serbia that has been very vocal about historical revisionism. Have you faced issues because of that?
Yes, I was attacked many times in regime's tabloids and in very dirty ways because, as I always say, history is a dogma here. So about the present, you can say more or less whatever you want. But if you speak critically of Second World War or the wars of the 90s or even the Middle Ages, that's the serious opposition to the regime, because the main force of the regime, both Vucic and Milosevic, is the control of the narrative. And the main control of the narrative is a self-victimization of Serbs. So this is how it started. In fact, in 1980s, the whole nationalistic movement came out with Milosevic, changed the narrative of the past. They changed the whole past, in fact, in order to destroy Yugoslavia and in order to change the borders between the republics. While talking about the present, while talking about politics, of course, it is emotional, but still, it's still rational. But talking about the past is something where the irrationality becomes more important. And this is why talking about the past is more dangerous than talking about the present.
Thank you for listening. You can find more installments of our Women's War series in our website, balkaninsight.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.